Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Imagine the streets of Jakarta filled with cars lit on fire, glasses broken as mobs raid every store they can find. A demonstration so devastating that it can bring a capital of a nation into its knees. Indonesia is in grave danger. Indonesia's situation is so dire that it may become an inevitable ticking time bomb if no drastic action is taken. This bomb is so lethal to Indonesians that the riots of May 1998 in Jakarta may repeat itself if the situation is not diffused. Many of you would ask, what is this ticking time bomb? This ticking time bomb is the potential showdown between clashing races or religion. If the problem is left unchecked, this bomb may unexpectedly detonate before long. And the cause of this bomb to detonate is prejudice, the root cause of human conflicts. Assuming that Indonesia repeats the perpetuation of these social inequalities, it can escalate and become more violent. Despite a number of laws and rules regarding injustice in Indonesia, prejudice and discrimination still prevail. The problem is that these potentially lethal issues in Indonesia may become worse, and Indonesia is being idle in this situation. If anything, action is required to have a better change in Indonesia. Since Indonesians have been perpetuating prejudice, social inequality, and due to the lack of actions taken to remedy this inequality, specific appropriate interventions should be made to significantly reduce social inequality. We need to be reminded that Indonesia is rich in diversity and has thousands of islands, tribes, and culture. Due to this, it is required that Indonesia enacted the regulations and laws regarding anti-discrimination, beliefs against the prejudice of other races and religions, and rules regarding the unity of the nation in Indonesia. Although these factors have aided the abolishment of overt discrimination, an underlying source of prejudice still exists, and there has been a constant perpetuation of negative prejudice and stereotyping that leads toward discrimination. This raises skepticism toward Indonesian society and their national slogan Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, or in other words, unity in diversity. The slogan signifies that minorities are not only recognized, but their rights are fully respected. It is also stated in the 1945 Constitution of the Republic of Indonesia in Article 28D verse 1 that each person has the right to recognition, security, protection, and certainty under the law that shall be just and treat everybody as equal before the law. Keep in mind that this law includes every person in Indonesia. However, with regard to recent events of prejudice and discrimination, the diversity in the slogan seems to be exclusively reserved for only certain ethnic groups in the country. It is then important to understand the source of these prejudiced and discriminatory actions and study the core concepts of prejudice, stereotyping, and discrimination to determine the proper actions of aiding the abolishment of prejudice and discrimination. Prejudice refers to the attitude, feeling, or opinion of an individual toward another individual of another group, either positive or negative. For example, an individual might state that he does not like Indonesians because they make him angry. To clarify, prejudice is different with stereotypes. Stereotypes are beliefs, thoughts, or expectations of a group. Likewise, Stereotypes are like pictures that exaggerate or perhaps oversimplify descriptions of an individual through their appearance, their behavior, or their abilities. For example, an individual might state that Americans are arrogant or obnoxious. Lastly, discrimination refers to our behavior, either direct or indirect, toward treating people in a particular way due to their groups. For example, in a working environment, an individual would not hire nor become friends with a person if he or she were an Australian. From these definitions, it is important to note from Banton that before creating interventions, we first must understand the roots or nature of prejudice. Prejudice appears in escalating levels of violence. This way, prejudice can be understood in a way that the perpetuation of prejudice makes transitions to the next level easier. In this case, Indonesia's peak of violence is averaged to be around the third and fourth level. According to Alport, the third level is discrimination or legalized racism. In this level, people begin to create detrimental distinctions and restrict or exclude members of one group from opportunities or privileges available to another group. The fourth level is violence against people and property and involves physical attacks. This level shows heightened prejudice that may even result in wars between gangs, abandonment of unwanted children, and radical religious violence such as bombings. The fifth level is extermination, and it involves lynchings, massacres, and genocide, the peak of violent prejudice. Although it is true that people rarely move from a lower scale to a higher scale, it is also true that any kind of activity or behavior on a particular level facilitates a transition to the next level with increased speed. It took only 20 years for Hitler to turn prejudice towards the Jews into a genocide. It may imply that the lowest level of prejudice is harmless, but progression in the century is growing in frequency regarding prejudice, since people grow ever more interdependent, and the attitude of prejudice can pass on for generations. This further increases the possibility of creating higher levels of prejudice and discrimination in the next generations. Although the country of Indonesia claims religious freedom as one of its foundational laws, it does not seem so after all the cases and discriminatory actions that have occurred, mainly due to the underlying prejudice that still exists in the nation's minds. Recalling from the events of May 1998 riots, prejudice can be caused by fears or threats. The fact that many Chinese were discriminated against during that time can create fear into their minds, and from that they begin to create prejudiced thoughts, assuming that Indonesians despise Chinese. A theoretical approach by Walter G. Stephan and Cookie White Stephan considers intergroup fears and threats as major causes of prejudice. For instance, Muslims acting as suicide bombers and causing fear is one of the representations that fear and threat can cause prejudice. Adding towards Stephan's theory, Duckett and Oskamp noted the 4 levels or possible factors that cause prejudice and discrimination. So in a sense, prejudice is caused by fears, threats, and the 4 levels mentioned by Duckett and Oskamp. These levels are ordered in a way that the greater the level of intervention, the greater its potential impact will be. Duckett emphasizes that attempts to reduce prejudice should take place at these levels. The first level is nature. Causes of prejudice can be caused by genetics. Prejudice naturally exists in our behaviors and interactions. However, due to the lack of research made, Oskamp stated that relatively little can be done in this level. The second level becomes the most powerful intervention in changing human interactions compared to other levels. This level introduces how society molds individuals to follow certain rules and behaviors to maintain order. These rules include laws, regulations, and norms of segregation. One cause of prejudice and discrimination in Indonesia is due to the societal and organizational patterns in laws and Indonesian society. Indonesia's 1945 state constitution and Pancasila stated the laws regarding equality, but inequality still prevails. Due to this, interventions at this level should be made by higher authorities because they have the ability and power to change laws. Authorities between groups such as principals from schools or leaders from organizations, on the other hand, are able to change social norms or regulations to significantly reduce prejudice. The third level is the mechanism of social influences in groups and interpersonal interactions. Examples in this level include the mass media, the educational system, and the structure of work organizations. In this level, it is important to understand the distinctions between normative and informative influence in order to classify and structure influence or intervention attempts. Examples of normative social influence or influences that involve pertaining to a norm or standard include social media portrayals and work organizations. This type of influence is important for Indonesians to understand the working environment. On the other hand, informative social influence or influences that involve providing information include educational programs. This influence is also important for Indonesians to promote tolerance. Due to this, education toward people of young age in Indonesia should be made in both informative and normative influences to become effective. Other possible options include awareness for anti-prejudice social norms and awareness for inconsistencies in people's beliefs. The fourth level is a more personal cause of prejudice. Cause of prejudice in this level is likely caused by personal differences to prejudiced attitudes and behaviors. Interventions at this level can only be made by professional therapists and psychologists, but Indonesia lacks the development to engage in making interventions in this level. With the previously observed causes of prejudice and discrimination, the levels proposed by Duckett and the theory proposed by Stefan displayed the most preferred interventions required to reduce prejudice. Next, it is then possible to attempt creating programs that reduce prejudice and discrimination based on these theories. Indonesians lack the interaction of mixed ethnic interactions and cultural interactions. Without them, many assumptions from any media can be misunderstood and create prejudice in the Indonesian community. The phrase, "tidak kenal, maka tidak sayang," explains this situation. This phrase means not knowing or be familiar with, thus not caring. Due to this, a type of technique that promotes mixed ethnic or cultural interactions is effective because of its relation to cooperative learning programs, especially an approach in improving intergroup relations in school settings. These programs help improve learning outcomes by using carefully developed procedures where small groups of mixed ethnic interactions are made cooperatively on assigned lessons. According to research, the programs prove to be very successful in reducing prejudice and negative stereotypes. Lastly, interventions are possible in Indonesia through a Christian worldview and perspective. It is a common belief among Christians that all humans are made in the image of God. Therefore, any action that devalues a person is an insult to God who created and loved that person. It is stated in Galatians 3 verse 28 that there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you all are one in Christ Jesus. With the Bible, the worldview of Christianity becomes a crucial factor in educational and cultural interventions. The theories and research prove possible ways to reduce prejudice and discrimination between groups. However, each path should be carefully executed in order to avoid potential pitfalls if prejudice reduction efforts were successful. Although this research has been made in these aspects, the important step to take is applying careful interventions in real-world intergroup situations and community-wide programs. It is true that Indonesia has made countless efforts to significantly reduce social inequalities. Subsequently, Indonesia is a developing country and has learned from its past mistakes. It should be clear that after several years of effort, the income inequality should be decreasing as a developing country. However, social inequalities flowing from prejudice and discrimination still prevail in Indonesia. Some questions or misunderstandings can arise, such as, why should we take proper actions when Indonesia has already improved from the past? And what makes these injustice actions a troublesome issue that we require contextual interventions for Indonesia? Indonesia is still a developing country, and it still requires time to improve in many aspects such as education, infrastructure, and poverty eradication. Though it may seem that Indonesia needs to focus more on these aspects of society, it may be difficult to do so with prejudiced mindsets as obstacles in our society. What is needed to be done instead is focusing on the contextual interventions Indonesia needs to reduce prejudice and discrimination. Subsequently, at the same time, education can be improved and, ultimately, in the end, other aspects can be improved. Aronson and Thubideau proposed that programs regarding the interactions of mixed ethnic relations and cultural relations help reduce prejudice and discrimination. This type of intervention can be applied into Indonesia's education to reduce prejudice. Another possibility includes arguments stating that discrimination is a natural and essential behavior in the society to help keep us alive. So what makes discrimination so wrong that contextual interventions are required to reduce it? For example, if a woman assumes that a man approaching her at night in a dark alley is a rapist, she defends herself with a prejudiced mindset, and through discrimination, she is able to save herself. Such an example clearly shows that discrimination is important in our lives, but why are contextual interventions needed? MacLeod stated that the problem with society today is that discrimination is not defined as a tool, but as an absolute value. Without any evidence, people tend to create assumptions that lead to prejudice. From the previous example, instead of assuming that not all men are rapists, people tend to assume that all men are rapists. It must be understood that discrimination is not white and black, but gray. Then, what defines discrimination as a tool? If an individual is able to perceive and find evidence that a threat is in line with their prejudice, it is justified to take action based on that prejudice, thus using that prejudice as a tool for discrimination. It is important to publicize this knowledge to clarify the misunderstanding about discrimination. With prejudice understood, interventions can begin to become implemented in Indonesia's society and significantly reduce prejudice. If the people work together now, Indonesia's potential to become more developed than ever will highly be probable, and their slogan, Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, will be flourished longer into the future. Indonesia should not start being ignorant because only the people of Indonesia are the solution to this prejudice problem. To avoid future lethal inequalities that act as Indonesia's obstacle, Indonesia should start now. Will the Indonesians begin to help their own country? Will we begin to create Bhinneka Tunggal Ika into a reality? The answer should be obvious. Thank you, and God bless you.